this is our next segment, and I want to kind of flow from what we just talked about, Christine and you. We hear a lot about this conversation about women's leadership, and we hear a lot in the tech industry. You know, the Google effect and so forth. What does it look like for women in tech? And I know you might want to myth bust a bit after COVID when we say it's the rise of tech jobs.
Yeah, I mean, hearing the last panel, I wanted to be up here so bad because so many great things were discussed, and it's good to see progression on the boards. But the women in technology sector is actually going backwards, and we actually make up about 23% of the tech sector, and that is less than what it was 3 years ago, and it is less than what it was 5 years ago, and it is less than what it was 10 years ago. So we were actually 27.7% 10 years ago. So we're kind of going in the wrong direction. And I know COVID did, we lost 2% over the last 2 years. And I know that a lot of that had to do with the pandemic, women self-selecting to leave their jobs to take care of their families. And now we have the economic situation facing us. But you add that on top of the fact that women are also paid on average 3% less than their male counterparts for doing the same exact job. And we have about, I think in the tech sector specifically, the top 3,000 companies, we only have 5% women CEOs. So, a lot of work, really. It's exhausting, kind of sitting here thinking about it, but we all have a part to play. And so, what are some of the things that we can do? We've touched upon a lot of this stuff throughout the day, which is great. But, first we have mentoring. It sounds, I hear people talk about it and applaud a WBC for such an amazing, a mentoring, program that they put through. But I talk to tech companies all day long and I ask them, what does your mentorship program look like? And many of them still do not have a formal mentorship, sponsorship program where they can plan for career pathing for the women in their organization. And then I have men come to me, to CEOs and executives, say, can you help me please find women in the technology industry for open jobs and leadership positions? You have the women already. Like, they're in your organization, right? We really have to start, I think before it was said about open conversations and trying to, really bust open some of this stuff, because it really bothers me when they come to say, oh, I don't have any women engineers, applying for roles, but they have so many women in their company that were never given an opportunity for technical training. And we provide, one of the things that the WIT Network does is we do provide technical training, and we ask a survey. I know this because we ask them. We trained with Microsoft support, we trained 1,500 women in technology last year. And the survey said, why, were you interested in this? And they said, because my male colleagues were the ones given the opportunities for the technical training, and I was never offered it. So it's like, okay, we're starting to uncover, some of the problems there. But, that's just one thing. The mentoring, training, gender bias, right? So 50% of women surveys say that they experience some form of microaggression, while at their job. And, before we talked about community and connection at work and the importance of, inspiring people. But people at jobs in the tech sector, women at jobs in the tech sector, are feeling some kind of an attack or a violation. And then you add even people of color and other, other aspects like that. And so what can we do to really help educate, the people in the workforce about these microaggressions beyond the 1-hour diversity training video that you're required to take, for your company? I sat through these things and I'm like, these are not meaningful. They don't help people to really understand what a microaggression looks like in real life. And so you add on top of that, pay inequity. Gail and the team before spoke about that, pay inequity and promotion of women. And so maybe that's where the woman who wrote the app that helps to identify, what was Cyndio?
The pay equity.
Yeah. Maybe we have to get Cyndio into more of these tech company organizations. But all of that stuff, they're barriers. So, when people say, why are there not more women in tech, there are a lot of barriers.
So let me ask a question because we're going to kind of bring in the rest of the panel after this question. So we hear a lot, and we had a couple of them on the panel before, about entrepreneurship and using technology as an opportunity to both create positions in companies, whether that's Macy's or McDonald's, right? Or women starting their own businesses in tech. What does that look like, that kind of entrepreneurship piece of that?
Well, interesting. I think that remote work, a lot of people say, how does remote work impact women in tech? And I think that actually helps them both from an employee standpoint as well as an entrepreneur and also a consultant level, right? Because you remove the gender bias factor when you're online, which I think is very helpful. It also allows another issue that women face a little bit more in the workplace is work-life balance and the ability to have that flexibility. And so this online working allows for women entrepreneurs, to have that more flexibility, allows them to connect with more people. They can, start a consultancy rather than have a full-time job, and that allows them to have more diverse and interesting projects that allow them to build more skills. And, where maybe at one job in a corporation, they wouldn't have the opportunity to gather all of that. So I do think that that is a factor in helping to foster more female entrepreneurs.
And so are there percentage of figures of female entrepreneurs in tech? And their
5%.
access to finance? 5%.
5%, and you can correct this stat if it's wrong, but I read that last year there was $330 billion venture capitalists provided tech startups, and women were 2%.
That is true. And this is where I'm going to turn it over to Judith and Loretta to talk about. We hear this sort of, where is the capital? What's this barrier between the access to it, the opportunity to get the capital? I don't know if you want to start, Loretta.
Sure. So I am a co-CEO of a company called Golden Seeds, and we invest only in women entrepreneurs. So, and we've been doing it. We have had over 1,000 investors. We're all angel investors. We've had over 1,000 through all the 18 years that we've existed, including, by the way, Paula Bennett, sitting in the front row here, who is an active member and investor at Golden Seeds. I'll paint a slightly rosier picture, but there's still, like it has been said often here, it takes so much intentionality, and we are a very long way from declaring success. But I will say that when we started Golden Seeds, which is now 18 years ago, in this early stage of investing, there were 50,000 companies that got funding as startups that year, and only 3% of them were women. However, we are now 18 years later, and that number is 24 to 25%. So there really has been good progress. Women are starting 35 or 40% of companies, so we cannot declare success. And when women do get funding for reasons that we don't have time for on this panel, they tend to get less than men get. And they tend to have a tougher time when it comes to facing the venture capital world later, which is far less familiar with investing in women and the kinds of businesses they invest in. It's not simply that they don't invest in women. They often are less likely to invest in some of the kinds of businesses that women do. I will say that from the companies we've invested in, over 55% of them are enterprise technology companies founded by and led by at least one senior woman. So a thrilling thing that has happened over the last 10 to 15 years is that not only are there many people who are focused on getting capital to these companies, but there are incredible developments by women entrepreneurs that make us so proud to be part of them, because we now have generations of women now who have the highest levels of education that women have ever had in all fields, as well as several generations of women as angel investors who now at last have the capital to do this investing. That's pretty thrilling that we've made our own capital and can invest if we choose to. But it is mostly particularly thrilling to see what women entrepreneurs are doing, because that's what inspires us every day. We want to invest in these companies that are changing the world in their own ways. And we do remind ourselves that if we don't play a role in getting them going, it might be a little tougher for them to get to the next level and the next level and the next level.
Judith, I want to bring you into the conversation.
Yeah, thank you, Gwen. I think you're right, Christine, that the number is somewhere between 2 to 2.5% of venture dollars are going to women founders. But the reality is that in a mixed gender business, it's more like 15%. So, I'm not saying that the numbers are good, but I think it's also important for us to think about two things. One is being funded with venture capital funding is not the only metric of success. Right? Venture capital funding is for very specific types of companies that fit that model. And so when we think about the fact that there are 12.5 million women-owned businesses in this country, over 90% of them are solopreneurs. They're not going to get venture capital funding. They're not built for that. So we have to think about the types of businesses they are and how big they are when we think about that. And I think the other thing, so when we say, all right, well, what kinds of capital, right? How do we get the capital? Women still have barriers in capital in general, right? The entrepreneurs are on a journey and they fit in along a whole spectrum. And sometimes what's going to be best is traditional debt, alternative debt. Maybe it's angel funding, maybe it's venture, maybe it's private equity. It could, or some combination thereof. But I think we need to understand what that looks like and figure out how to educate people appropriately so that they know what kinds of capital that they need to get so that they can approach it properly. My friend, and probably most of you know Phyllis Newhouse, she says, if you don't understand the rules of the capital game, you can't play the capital game. Right? So it's really important for us to spend our energy going after the type of capital that's going to help us grow the business we want to have in the future, or to say, you know what, I'm comfortable with the business I do have. Building a lifestyle business is fantastic for many, many people. They don't have to, create a unicorn. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just, if you don't mind, if I could ask you both a question. Why do you think it has gotten to that the percentage is so low? Are there myths around women business owners that have allowed for such a big discrepancy between, the funding? What would you both say?
So you're talking about the venture funding. So I would just repeat that in the earlier stage funding, it's very much better than it was. In the later stage funding, which is where venture is, I know that 2% sounds terrible, but it's really more like 2.5%. It's gotten a little better, and has been big growth in mixed gender teams getting some capital. There are biases, and I think we need to be really clear on that. The venture capital world is basically investing other people's money. They are investing the money of limited partners that have given them money to invest. They very often choose to invest in software companies, which is not necessarily where women have a long history. They like investing frequently in serial entrepreneurs that have previously built big businesses. So that shuts out a lot of women who haven't yet, but we're going to get there. But women haven't yet said, I'm a serial entrepreneur and I've already built these 4 big companies that have gone public or have been acquired for a lot of money. We're still on that path. I also believe that women suffer at times, often, by not being able to participate in the network effect that venture capital invests in. Venture capital firms frequently will turn to their networks that operate within the venture capital industry, and just in many, exactly like we've been talking in many other panels, women might be excluded. This takes a lot of work to figure out how to insert ourselves into those networks and be taken credibly and be seriously considered for funding. I will say, and this is our struggle every day at Golden Seeds, but one of the biggest things we often try to do with our companies is make the introductions into those networks that will with the kind of the wind at their back because they have gotten early funding from us. We have a reputation for of doing really good due diligence. So if we are endorsing a company and then introduce them into some of these networks, we have observed they will take it very much more seriously because they've had our backing. And, a really important part of this is that, and this is so true in all of these discussions today, is that women alone cannot solve any of these problems. We have got to have men in the picture, including in our case, introducing our companies to networks of people that might be primarily men, and convince them that these women are doing things that are really worthy of funding. And because that's the only way it's going to work. The more we live in a female ghetto and this kind of thing, we're not going to solve the big problems.
The other piece of that, and I think it kind of builds on what you're saying, Loretta, is it's time to change the narrative. Right? We're used to telling a victim story. We only get 2% of venture capital funding, but it's time for us to start talking about a potential story, a story of possibility. Just like Loretta said, there's amazing companies that women are creating out there that are growing and scaling, and they are able to achieve capital. So let's talk about those stories so that other women have that as an inspiration to aspire to.
And Judith, I want to pick up on that because we talk a lot about changing the narrative, right, and you were talking about sort of the other types of capital, not just venture, right? And where are those other opportunities? You talked about having the language, right? So part of this is education, maybe masterclass type of thing. Like where are we going? Where are some opportunities, Judith? We're laughing. We talk about this every day.
We talk about this. In the initiative, in the Entrepreneurs in Capital initiative, we did a series of surveys last year to figure out how do we articulate what the barriers to capital are? Because we talk about the barriers to capital, but then can we really come out and say what they are? So partnering with a lot of our other organizations in WBC to address what some of these barriers were, the WBC decided to take on a collaboration with Babson College, sponsored by Wells Fargo, to create a masterclass on capital. And so soon, hopefully, 7 webinars are going to be released that you can distribute as broadly as you like, all around the fundamentals of capital. So the first 2 are just going to be about the fundamentals of capital. What does institutional capital look like? How does ownership work? Those kinds of things. And then there are going to be 5 webinars on 5 different types of capital. And so this will give any entrepreneurs, right, women or anybody, an opportunity to listen and learn a little bit so that they can be more educated. Because what we don't want to have is have entrepreneurs spending their time, their energy, and other people's time and energy seeking the wrong type of capital. So just as an example, we spoke to an entrepreneur last year who spent an inordinate amount of time trying to seek angel funding. And she was not successful. But it expended a lot of her energy that she should have been using to run her business. It expended a lot of energy of a lot of angels listening to her. And at the end of the day, the question was, well, what did you really need? And she said, well, I needed $10,000 to buy a piece of equipment. And I was like, well, that's not what angel funding's for, right? If you needed $10,000 to buy a piece of equipment, you should have gone to an equipment lessor, and you probably could have solved your problem in 30 minutes, right? And you wouldn't have had to do all these other things. And so really starting to get an understanding of what is the capital I need at any particular stage of my business, because it changes over time, right? How do I approach it? How do I become knowledgeable and confident about it? And then also to think about how you show up, right? And maybe this is just an extension, Gwen, but like, how do you get ready for that capital? Because just like nobody's born a CEO, people aren't born knowing what they need to know about capital. They need to spend some energy learning. They need to have ownership, confidence. They need to know how to pitch it. And I think one of the traps that women fall into is when a finance question comes to them, well, I've got a guy. You know what? That's just not going to work, right? Because if you're the CEO, I'm glad if you have somebody helping you with your numbers. That's excellent. You should. But you also need to own that. And so you need to learn how to be competent to have that dialogue about a P&L or have that dialogue about what my cash flow looks like and this is where I'm going. And so taking that upon yourself, and we've heard that all day, right? Being a continuous learner, being curious, making sure that you have a grasp of the information is really critical.
And how can we make sure that, again, as we talk about on all our panels, this is all women? Right, so like in the tech initiative, we have high tech and ITSMF, but how can we make sure that either that language, that narrative, that capital, those opportunities are available to all women? Because we know it looks different for women of color, right? So maybe Loretta, you want to start with that one?
are you thinking about how do entrepreneurs avail themselves of the available capital?
And how do we make sure that capital is to all women, to women of color,
Yeah,
just as
right.
much?
So I can obviously best answer this from our point of view, but we've said a lot about intentionality today, but I would say when on the whole issue of entrepreneurs of color, it takes another whole level of intentionality. And very often entrepreneurs of color come to us who have created very interesting business ideas. They may not have any prior experience as an entrepreneur. They may not have gone through some of the fancy accelerators that are available, and we have learned that that we still believe that we have got to create the conditions for them to have a serious opportunity to be funded here or somewhere. So we do works especially with a task force within Golden Seeds to try to make sure that they are really ready to go through the process of seeking capital from us or from other places. So we don't have a formal training program for it. We just start mentoring those entrepreneurs because it's heartbreaking if they start going through our process and then they just are at sea. They don't know how to necessarily, and many of them have great ideas. I mean, you really can imagine that if they get this funding, they will attract talent. They will figure out distribution for their product, and they'll have a great business. But figuring out how to create the confidence, so much of what we do is trying to present entrepreneurs to our many hundreds of investors in such a way that those people will see in those entrepreneurs someone that they really want to back. They imagine that they can build a big business, that they'll create a great team. And if someone comes along who doesn't look like other entrepreneurs. I mean, this is really why we started Golden Seeds, because women faced that problem 18 years ago. And it is really women of color and entrepreneurs of color are now going through the same thing in many ways. So we feel that we're extra alert to the challenges, but it really does take particular intentionality to use that overused word to ensure that the conditions exist for them to have a real shot at funding.
I think sort of in addition to what Loretta is saying is that we have to focus on the funders as much as we have to focus on the people seeking capital, right? Because what we hear over and over again is, well, I like to fund a certain type of business, or I'd like to fund somebody who's done this multiple times. They don't look like they're not what I'm used to. They're not already a customer. And so we have to educate people about what does it mean to start to diversify our portfolios. How do we do it? How do we think differently? And also we need to start talking about the racial wealth gap, right? So for the type of capital that requires a personal guarantee, one person's personal guarantee may look very different from somebody else's, and we need to educate on why that is true, what the systemic issues are that are related to that, and think about how we need, as capital providers, need to get over that and through it so that we can start to change the...
It's how you analyze it, right? Which goes to how you analyze risk and so forth. What about in the tech space? You were talking, Christine, about how it does look very different. And it's the intentionality, it's getting some of the same people in the room. Lorraine talked about, fishing not in the pond, but in the sea.
Yeah, I was telling Gwen earlier, I was on a board call, and somehow, we started talking about how can we really, that the fact that so many reports in the tech sector still were not moving the dial fast enough, and now, going backwards. And, it was interesting because a lot of the services that we provide are, to get in there and help the corporate ERGs to skill their women, technical training, leadership cohorts, mentoring, all of that sort of stuff. And, just talking about how do budgets get approved for that. And 3 of the big tech companies on the call said, well, interestingly, DE&I sits under HR, and the DE&I part of our org has no budget. Well, wait a minute. So we're going backwards with stats, and we're not making change fast enough. corporate CEOs are saying this is important to my company, but not allocating, dollars to the change. Well, now I get it. Now I understand, right? So I think a lot of what we're all doing here, and I applaud these women because you're driving change. It's really commendable, and we all have to say we leave here today. Like, this is going to make me have very different conversations with these corporate leaders now, and I think we all, I don't know if you're going to ask us, what's the one takeaway, but I would say, how can you leave here and challenge, some, and not every company is this way, I realize that, and there's a lot of great work being done out there, but we have to encourage people to speak up and, as they said, push harder to understand and, really get behind what is our company actually doing about this. And I want to know, why is there no money allocated to driving corporate change for DE&I? That seems counterproductive to me.
You want to ask the question?
Yeah.
Do you really care? So Loretta, I'm going to turn it over to you to either the takeaway or what's the opportunity? What's the opportunity right now, looking forward to WBC talks about 2025 targets? Where is that opportunity?
My main thought after all of the conversations I've heard today is just the need to be unrelenting in our pursuit of these initiatives. You cannot let up for a minute, because there's an audience of people out there, whatever worlds we live in, who are kind of looking for us to kind of crack a little, and I think that, in my organization, we just know that one of the things that has allowed us to survive as long as we have, which is a long time for a group like this, is just that we just don't give up. We just move forward every month, looking at another hundreds of companies and trying to engage as many of our investors in this work as possible by shining a light on these amazing opportunities that are presented to them. But it's not like you cannot let up for a minute.
Judith, change the narrative, don't let up.
I think change the narrative. Also, look, women are over-mentored and under-sponsored. So this is an opportunity for us to sponsor women, but also in a different way. It's not just about talking about them so that they can get a board seat or so that they can get on the path to be a CEO. This is also about introducing them to your network, just like Loretta said, right? We can introduce them to somebody else that we know. We might not be the right capital provider. Let me introduce them to Loretta, or let us introduce them to a venture capitalist in a different network. Use the resources that we all have every day. Every day, make an impact for one person. That's going to actually help create change on both sides of the table.
Yep. So that said, this is the collaborative. This is all of us learning from each other. So thank you, Judith, Loretta, and Christine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.